Test, 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 test.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the West Ada School District Superintendent Forum. I want to thank you all for attending. I want to welcome the West Ada School District Board of Trustees. They are not participating tonight and are here just to observe. There are 4 candidates for superintendent: Dr. Derek Bubb, Brett Heller, Sam German, and Wendy Johnson. Applicant bios were handed out as you entered and are on the table in the back for your reference. As you entered, you were given a number if you want to ask a question tonight. We will enter all the numbers in a randomizer, which we've already done. And when we call your number, please come to the podium, state your name and affiliation to West Ada, then please ask your question. Each candidate will alternate answering the questions first. Dr. Bubb will be the first to answer the first question, and Mr. Heller the first to answer the next, and so on. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer. If your question has already been asked, then please ask a different question. We want to make sure everyone has a chance to learn as much about the candidates as they can, so there will be no commentary allowed, just questions. We also would like to remind you that in accordance with the Equal Employment Opportunity Act, the district must provide equal employment opportunities to all persons. As such, please do not ask questions regarding the following: race, color, religion, creed, national origin, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, ancestry, marital status, military status, or citizenship status. I also want to thank you for wearing your mask. Being safe allows us all to be able to gather together. So we will begin with our first number, which is 9.
Luckily, I'm ready. Having a maskological problem here.
Okay.
So I'm Richard Smith, and basically I'm just a taxpayer.
Great.
And that's about the extent of it. And so my question is very short. By the time a student has finished high school, can you say what you think are the 5 most important academic subjects that the students should have learned? And that was all I wanted to ask, because I'm curious. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time, and good evening.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm going to answer that in probably a little bit more broad fashion, and I would say this. I think that we've learned a lot about school and really the responsibility of schools to help produce well-rounded individuals, not just in academic subjects. That being said, to answer specifically to your academic subjects, I think obviously we're teaching our kids to be creative thinkers. When we talk about creative thinkers and creative problem solvers, we're talking about our obvious math and English. I want our students to be able to be literate. I want our students to be able to be reading at grade level, to be able to be comprehending information, to be able to take informative text and develop their own opinions on that informative text. From a math standpoint, I want them to be creative problem solvers. From a social science standpoint, I want our students to be able to, when they graduate from school, I want our students to be able to reflect on what's happened in our history, to really look at our past and analyze that and use that to impact their decisions of today. Outside of that, and this is where the well-rounded part comes in, I think our arts programs are incredibly important for our students as they go through school. And I guess last but not least would be the basic study skills that our kids need to have to be able to be successful at the next level. And those can be taught through our cornerstone classes, those can be taught through our just our regular academic classes. But those are the things that I would expect our students are able to come out with to be good contributing members of our society.
So I think we can talk about things like we want all of our students, we want to read, we want them to write, we want them to be able to do mathematics, we want them to understand the social sciences of history, and they want to be good consumers of and learners of science. I talked a little bit with the last focus group about this idea of something I would like to see us do, which is engage our community in identifying what is the portrait of what a West Ada graduate needs to look like when they walk across the stage at the end of their high school career. And so actually bringing our community in to build a portrait of a graduate and identify what are the skills, the knowledge, the dispositions, what are the things that our patrons, our business leaders, our elected officials are seeing a need for when these students walk across the stage and into the community, into college or into career. So yeah, we need to teach the core subject areas, and we need to teach those at a high level so these students can think for themselves. They can solve new problems, but then we also need to build a portrait of what's the guarantee that every student in West Ada is going to walk across the stage, that they have those skills so they are ready to tackle whatever challenges are going to face them when they leave our system and move into college or move into the career field. So I think it's more than just the core subject areas, but it's a place where we definitely know we need to start and do well.
Thank you for asking your question. I would like to start off with agreeing with what's been said so far. I would say it maybe a little bit differently. I would say we need the 4 core subjects plus more. And what I mean by that is this. When you look at those things that are going to help our students to be successful, a lot of what they learn that is important in their lives, it comes through the classroom, but it also comes through other experiences. Meaning, are we strong proponents of the extracurricular and co-curricular activities that exist in our schools? Are we the proponents of the arts, as has been said? Are we helping our students to be creative, to be collaborative, to be critical thinkers, to be good citizens and show good character, and to make sure that they have got the communication skills down that are very important. Those are the things that I would hope that we would incorporate into the 4 core plus more experiences that our students have. So again, appreciate your question, and do believe that these comprehensive experiences are preparing our students for what that next step will be, whatever it is that they choose.
Hi. I also agree with what's been said. We actually in the CUNA School District have defined what we want our students to know and be able to do in a profile of a graduate. We've then individualized that so that we're in the process of doing this now, where we've created kind of like a metric, a scoring guide, if you will, that shows whether or not a student is exhibiting those skills and is ready to graduate from our schools. An example of one of the things that we have on there, in addition to just, knowing how to read, math, being civically engaged, all of those things that you would expect, we have, as an important next step, having their foot in year 13, if that makes sense. So they have earned college credits in high school, or they have earned certifications that help them to go to work. So I think those sort of things are really important, that because they guide the rest of our systems, if that makes sense. Whatever we want in our graduates, we have to backtrack that down to kindergarten, so that we ensure that all of those skills are taught, those dispositions are taught. Thank you.
The next number is number 3.
Good evening. My name is Jared Lucas. I'm a parent of 6 children in the district. The question I have is, last year at this time, the West Ada School District was shut down because of COVID-19. There was no in-person school being offered. In 5 months, the 2021 school year will be starting. This year, West Ada did not offer 5 days of school per week to all grade levels. There were also many changes to the operating plan and a lot of confusion among faculty, students, and parents. It was a very suboptimal learning environment. Based on your specific experience, what confidence can we have that you will be able to lead and execute a plan in the fall that will allow for 5 days of school per week for all grade levels? Thank you.
Mr. Lucas, I would say that I have every confidence that that is the plan, that we will be 5 days in person next year. That is the goal. That's everything we've talked about as an executive team here in the West Ada School District. I've had conversations with many of the board members that that is the target, that in the fall, all students, K through 12, are in school 5 days a week. And that's the goal that we all need to be shooting for. So I have no doubt at all that that's going to be the case. I think our families clearly have communicated that that is what they want. We know it's the best place for all of our students to be in school. There's no safer place than our schools. And I was with many of you that celebrated when our 6 through 12 students got to come back to school daily. And it's been a fantastic experience as we've brought them all back. And this is an opportunity for us to get to 5 days a week starting the first day of school in August. So to me, the problem or the opportunity, I guess I should say, is between now and then, how do we make sure that we clearly communicate that next step? And working with the Board of Trustees, working with our communication department, working with our building principals to make sure that the message is sent out that this is the expectation, that in the fall, all students are going to be in school 5 days a week. And then we will have the virtual schoolhouse option for those who still want a virtual option and not be in school on a daily basis. So to me, it's that constant ability for us to engage with our stakeholders and let them know that that is the plan. I don't see any reason why we can't accomplish it based on the data that we are collecting right now with 6 through 12 back every day. The data continues to convict us that what we're doing is working and that we can be in school every single day, K through 12 next year.
I think I'll take an approach of what I have done as a superintendent in another district in another state. And what I'd like to share with you is that I believe that in some cases we have allowed the health professionals and experts to tell us what we needed to do. And I think that that was appropriate. I think that we've gathered the data, though, as Brett said, and that we have shown that school is one of the safest places where our kids can be. And so I would be an advocate for getting back to what I'll call normalcy, to allowing our students and families to have that 5-day-a-week experience. But I think we also need to keep in mind that we're still working with the health officials. And so it needs to be something that is discussed, and that the implementation of that would be done in a way where we're not pitted against each other. There is value in a healthy society. There is value in a healthy social and emotional society as well. So the health and the social emotional and the learning that needs to take place for these kids, and I'll even add in the activities that they need to be a part of, that is all just this critical mass of things that we need to be considering. And so yes, I would be an advocate for 5 days a week and getting back to what we would call a normal school year as much as possible.
So first of all, I just need to thank you all for what you've been through. I know this year has been really the most difficult year I think probably any of us have ever experienced, and for certainly our students. So I'm your neighbor to the south in the CUNA School District, and we have been open 5 days a week. We were open pretty early on with our K through 5, and then we were in a hybrid schedule after in our secondary schools. And I would give the credit to having a very specific plan, because our goal the whole time was to return our students to in-person learning, and it was explicitly stated in the plan. We collaboratively built that plan, and then we just worked it and monitored our data. We wanted to make sure, because going into this year, none of us really knew what to expect as far as like rules and infection rates and all of these things. And we learned quickly, and as quickly as we learned, our goal, and we did it, was to return kids to school. That doesn't mean that it was easy by any means. There was, especially at the beginning of the year, a lot of fear, and we had to work through that together. So, yeah, I would say that would be my plan if I were the superintendent of the West Ada School District.
Thank you so much for the question. It would be an expectation that we go back to school 5 days a week next year. I think we learned a lot through this process. I think we've learned a lot about intentionally engaging our stakeholders. I think we've learned a lot about advocating for our kids. It's not going to be any surprise that this has really been a fine balance between mental health of students and where we're at with the spread of this sickness. And I think that we really need to look at the mental health of our students and strongly advocate for our students to be back in school with health officials. I think we need to look at that whole student picture rather than just looking at one side of things and not having them in school. It would be an expectation. I've been a champion for our students to be back in school. I was lucky enough and fortunate enough to be part of the committee that brought our kids back to school thus far, and I expect that we would continue to champion for kids. And we know that the data now tells us, as we look at that our students being in schools is a safe place for them. We have protocols in place that can keep them safe. Obviously, as a site principal, it's a responsibility for me to make sure our students are safe in our schools. But we've got those protocols in place, and I think now, as we head into the next school year, we're ready to bring our kids back full time and engage them in activities. And I hate the term, but I'll use it anyway. Get back to that normal life that we had before.
Number 10, and Mr. Jarman will answer first this time.
Hello, Hank Allen here. I have 3 daughters in Ada County schools. I'm also a co-founder of Idahoans for Safe Technology. And I don't know if you guys know, but the Wi-Fi that we have in our schools, along with the cell towers on pretty much all the high school light standards, emit RF radiation that's proven biologically harmful to our children. And if you were elected superintendent of schools, would you address this issue and protect our children from RF radiation? Thank you.
Thank you, Hank, for that question. I believe that when you look at this concern, I would want to do more research on it before I made any decisions. I think that that there are emissions. I agree with that. I would like to be able to study. There are, like you said, there are many cell towers and Wi-Fi throughout all areas of this nation. And I think that we would have to have compelling evidence that would show that we are actually harming the health of our kids. I know that there would be those who would say, yes, that is already proven, and I would say that I would need to have additional information. This is something that has proponents and antagonists on both sides of the issue, and for me to feel comfortable in just saying, yeah, we're going to remove all of the Wi-Fi and cell phone towers, I don't think that I would be comfortable doing that right at this time.
Thank you. Obviously, our role as the superintendent and any leadership and teachers, all of us in the West Ada School District, our number one priority is the safety of our children, safety of our staff, safety of our community. I don't know enough about this topic to be able to say one way or another, and when I'm faced with a situation where I don't know, I definitely want to consult experts, whether they're experts in our school district or if they're experts outside of our school district that we'd bring in to address an issue such as you explained. Thank you.
And I think I would echo my colleagues' comments there. Safety is the number one concern that, as a superintendent, I would have for all of our students. I would really have to dig into the data, rely on our experts out there to give me information as I fact found to make sure that our students are safe, and then really look into the details of what the health effects could be, and really dig into that a little bit. So I'd leave it at that. Thank you.
It's going to sound like there's an echo in here because I think all of us are going to say a lot of the same things, which is we need to dig into that data and we need to engage with folks who have that information. We need to engage our chief technology officer in that conversation. We need to talk to other districts who have engaged in that work, looked at longitudinal studies, and try to make the right decision for the safety of our students. So yeah, it's making informed decisions about what's best for our kids, using the data that's already out there in the world. So certainly it sounds like we all need to do a little more research on that topic.
Number 4.
I appreciate this opportunity, and I appreciate your willingness to step up. This is not going to be easy. We live in unprecedented times, as you all know. And so I'm going to address an issue that's, I actually have 2 children in the district. I've had 3 graduate from Mountain View High School. And I also have formed a nonprofit that represents parents in the district. We're called Parents' Choice and Voice. There's about 600 of us. And one issue that is concerning to my parents is curriculum. And I'm excited to hear that you are all in favor of getting our children back in school 5 days a week. I love what all of you have said. That's super exciting. So now I want to address what's going to be taught. A concern to many of our parents is a curriculum that's infiltrating K through all the way up to universities, and that's critical race theory. I want to know what your definition of it is. I want to know what your understanding of it is. If you agree with it, if you are going to allow it in our district, and if you are, what will parents be able to decide? Will our children have to be exposed to this theory if they don't agree with it? And I, again, thank you so much for your time.
Let me just start by saying when that topic came out in the public last week, myself and many other people that I work with didn't even know what it meant. And so the first thing I went to was our standards and what are we required to teach this, because that was the accusation from some members of our legislators. We are required to teach the standards in the Idaho standards that were developed by Idahoans, and it does not exist in the Idaho standards. Quite frankly, with all of the things that we're supposed to teach that we are requiring our students to learn, there really isn't a lot of place to go or time to go outside of what we're required to teach. So because it's not in the standards and it's not a requirement, I would not expect that we would be teaching that in our school district. I will say this, though, with adoptions in curriculum, the actual resources that teachers use, I don't believe that because our curriculum materials actually have to reflect our standards, that our materials that are adopted will have that information in it as well. But I will say that students can look up information and find things, and a teacher's role isn't to direct a person's belief about, a student's belief about a certain thing. The teacher's role is to inspire critical thinking and not influence that thinking. So with the requirements of the standards, it's not in the standards. And I am not aware of any classrooms, at least in my district, where it is being taught.
So I would echo that a little bit. I would say this: we rely heavily on the standards, and when we do look at curriculum adoptions, it's really important that we get community voice in those curriculum adoptions. That doesn't mean just a survey, but really having parents become active participants. I've been on several curriculum adoptions, and parent voice is a huge part of that process. I think anytime that we're looking about what we're teaching in classrooms and how we're teaching in classrooms, our classrooms should echo our community views and make sure that what our community believes should be taught in those classrooms is aligned with our standards, and those things are adhered to. We want to respect and honor the values of the Idaho community and the Treasure Valley community, and make sure that that is what's being taught each and every day in our classrooms. It's the responsibility of the superintendent to make sure that we have systems in place to so parents, so community members have a voice in that, in what's being taught in the classroom, and that would be one of my utmost priorities.
Well, it's certainly a lightning rod topic that I was not surprised would show up tonight on this forum, because we're hearing about it an awful lot. And I would echo what Mrs. Johnson said, is many of us had to kind of look up what critical race theory really meant, and really to make sure we were informed ourselves and could really speak well to it. I will say this, as has been said, our curriculum in West Ada is aligned with the Idaho content standards, which are approved by the legislators. So those are the standards that we are teaching in our classrooms every day. There's also a concern that I hear about the resources that get adopted by a district, that those resources are made by a company, and that company is selling that product, and we're adopting that. And there's concerns that are those resources now going to be pushing critical race theory in some of those items. So just recently, as we're doing a math textbook adoption, we've had parents respond during the math textbook adoption, questioning certain aspects of things they read in the textbooks that were being looked at. Those are things we have to be considerate of. We have to involve our patrons in looking at the resources we're putting in front of our students to make sure they are focused on the standards, not focused on these other pieces that certainly our community has said they don't want to be part of the public school educational system. But then there's also the component of, we have high school students, middle school students who walk into class every day and they ask questions. And they are going to ask questions about critical race theory. I guarantee you more kids have asked questions about critical race theory in their classrooms the last week and a half than ever have asked before, because they're hearing about it on the news. They're hearing about these conversations. We have to make sure we have teachers who know how to navigate controversial, difficult situations and not take one side or the other, or make it where it's difficult for one student's beliefs to be heard over another student's beliefs. So we do have a responsibility as a district to make sure that all students have a safe learning environment and are feeling like they have the opportunity to learn at the same level as any other student in the classroom.
I will agree with what has been said, and I will also add this. If a teacher teaches something outside of the core curriculum and a parent brings it to our attention, as the leader of the district, we are to ensure that our teachers aren't going outside and creating controversy. And so if that were to happen, then it needs to be discussed with a teacher. And I would say it's not just with this item, it's with anything that has not been approved. We need to be very careful with the way that we are promoting or somehow politicizing any type of an issue. In this case, in response to your question, I'll just say it this way. If it's not part of the state-approved core curriculum, then we need to be careful that it doesn't happen. And frankly, to be honest, in most cases when I have researched and investigated a concern from a parent, I have 99% of the time I have found that the concern was a secondhand concern that didn't exist in that classroom, and in the 1%, we were able to rectify it and fix it and tell the person that they couldn't be teaching that.
Number 11. 11? 11, yes.
Good evening. I'm Russ Jokey, resident of the district, grandchildren in the school. And I'm here tonight on behalf of a public advocacy group that speaks on behalf of increasing school funding. The Idaho Constitution requires a thorough, uniform, and free public education to be established by the state legislature. You're going to be the CEO of the largest school district in Idaho. And our group is interested in what have you already done or will do to be an advocate for fulfilling the Idaho Constitution's role in funding public education.
Thank you. I think it's the role of the superintendent to not only develop relationships with local officials, but also with state officials and be a consistent advocate for our programs. I think the perspective that I bring to the table is I'm working with our programs right now. I know what at the ground level, what it costs to run some of our programs, and we know what the funding it currently is. We now provide our students, our programs with a lot of additional funding, and I think it's got to be a priority of the state to really look at funding our schools in the West Ada School District appropriately.
Well, I'll start with the fact that, as Mr. Bubb said, we need to be advocating down at the legislators. It is their responsibility to fund public education, and so it's our job to make sure that we are constantly advocating for public education to be funded appropriately. But it's also our responsibility as a district to make sure that we're using our resources that have been allocated to us in the most appropriate way, and that we're using those resources that are going to be directly aligned with the end goal, which is how do we educate our students. And so to me, it's the advocacy, working with local officials, our mayors of our different municipalities, working with the state elected officials to continue to talk about public education and how we can adequately fund public education so that we can meet our goals, and then working within the allocated resources that we have so that we're not putting any of the burden on our families, that continues to be our job as a district to use the funds that we have to give every student in our district the best education possible.
Thank you for your question. I think we are in a good spot. You mentioned that we would be the CEO of the largest school district in the state, and I believe that that does put a responsibility and we are accountable to be a voice for the people in the West Ada School District, and that may bleed over into being a voice for the rest of the districts in the state. We do need to spend the time talking with our legislators and making sure that we're sharing information with them, that we're listening to them as well, but hopefully respectfully requesting that they listen to us. We need to make sure that when we do so, that we're sharing correct information and data with them, so that when we do make a request for additional funding, we can tell them why it's needed and how it will be used, and let them know the importance of the investment in our future. As we do that, I think that we can hopefully lobby and come away with some positive measures to appropriately increase the funding that is needed. If we do that and we have the opportunity to build those relationships and improve the trust between us and our legislators, I think that we can come away with a very positive outcome.
Thanks, Russ, and I'm very supportive of the work that your organization and nonprofit does to help make sure that every child, no matter what attendance zone they're in, gets a high-quality education, because that's really the responsibility of our state as listed in our Constitution. I am one of a handful of superintendents currently in the state of Idaho that regularly does go down to the State House and testify against bad bills and testify in support of good ones that will help our children. Should I be hired, you're going to get someone who's going to have relationships already established, but already is very comfortable having those tough conversations and will advocate on behalf of public education in our state. I also think that another responsibility is to propose new ideas as a part of that. We can't just complain and we can't just always fight. We have to listen to the challenges and then say, what about? An example of that most recently is our school board in CUNA has proposed a resolution through the Idaho School Boards Association to allow schools to assess impact fees. I know in the West Ada School District, funds raised from those impact fees would very much help the school district and also help taxpayers because what we need to generate would be at least offset to some degree by those impact fees. And then I also think a responsibility of a superintendent is to help educate the board to become involved and citizens to become involved. So when there are hot topic issues that are directly impact your children because it impacts their schools and it impacts the school district that they're educated in, we have a responsibility to communicate those issues to our patrons so that they're aware and can contact their legislators as well. Thank you.
Number 8. Mr. Heller will answer this first.
Hi, I'm Linda Miller, and I have 9 children that have been through the district. I have 1 in middle school and 3 in high school, and 4 of those kids are adopted. I'm also a member of the parent network with Idaho Federation of Families that works for children and youth with mental illness. And what I would like to know is what you would like to do to move forward trauma-informed education training for our the teachers and administrators in our district.
A great question. Certainly, we all feel like we're coming a little bit out of a year of some trauma, and we've certainly seen increases in anxiety and mental health concerns. The idea that trauma-informed training for teachers is something that's not new and something that we can certainly spend more time making sure our educators understand how trauma impacts our students' lives. And when you have students who are coming into our system from a traumatic situation, that it's going to change everything about the way that student exists in your school for quite a long time. So how do we do that? And I think there's opportunities within trauma-informed practices that we can help work with our teachers to train them on those things. In terms of mental health, the other piece that we know that we need to focus on is social emotional learning. We need to focus on how do we spend time making sure our students understand how to advocate for themselves. How do they communicate with each other? How do they communicate with adults? So continuing to focus on more than just, one of the questions earlier was more than just the core areas of instruction, but how do we also teach students how to function in their society? And as we're coming back from being out of school for so long, how to reestablish the rhythms and routines that they've gotten used to not having in their lives. And so the structures and rhythms and routines that we used to have in a quote normal year, how do we reestablish those and help students reintegrate? And as we brought all of our students back from 6 through 12 daily, there were some students who were really struggling with the new routine of coming to school and being around so many people again. So it's going to take time. We have to be aware of it. We have to train our teachers to look for the signs of those issues, and then we have to provide training along the way to continue to improve those practices.
Great question, Linda. Thank you for asking it. I believe that my answer would be with any of our issues that we're trying to help our students to overcome, I would hope that we are offering professional development to our staff so that they can be aware of and informed of what they should be looking for when a student is in trauma. Giving that type of help so that we can be as proactive as possible. A lot of times the student is already in crisis when that is noticed, but yet hopefully we can do our part to identify and help the student. One of the things that I really believe strongly in is that relationship between the teacher and the student. And so I said this earlier, I'll say it again. If we can help our students to feel safe in a classroom and have their basic needs met, and then if that teacher shows that they care about that student and that they actually love them, that then they start to connect with each other. When you have that happen, it becomes much easier for the student to commit to the learning piece, and then that teacher is put in a great position to build the confidence of that student. If we can accomplish those three things, help students to feel safe, make the connection with them, and then build their confidence, I think that helps in the trust to overcome some of these things where kids don't share what they're feeling, and that can help with getting them the support services they need.
Linda, thank you for your work in this important venue. I know as a person who's adopted children that you sometimes have had I imagine, very personal experiences with this. And we know that when a child is acting out, their behavior is telling us something. In the past, we had a very punitive approach, I think, as educators, because that's what we thought, tough consequences. Doesn't mean that you remove consequences from the equation, but when a student has been through traumatic experiences, it can impact how their brain has been wired, which can then impact learning. And so I think our work, not only, because most of our teachers, or most of our students spend most of their time with teachers, our teachers need to know what those signs are, and they need to know how to respond. But I know one of the shining lights in the West Ada School District is the counseling program. We have benefited from it in my school district, and so I think the work that they've done in supporting children plays an important role in this. And then I would add to that conversation that parents also need to have some support and development. So if that's helping, to work with your organization to connect parents who have children who've experienced trauma so that they can also help support and learn more. We know that that's when their parent is supported, the student is supported, the likelihood of the student being a contributing responsible citizen and learning is all aligned. So a child cannot learn if they're in trauma. Our job is to work with parents to help them feel safe and help them have the skills and help us to make sure we have the compassion and understanding to respond to that child's needs. So thank you.
I too appreciate your question, and I would go back to kind of that Maslow's hierarchy of need and just kids needing to feel safe before they move forward at all. One of the things that has really come to light is just some of the trauma that our students are going through at home or wherever that might be, if that's a foster home, whatever that might look like. That's really, the recent events has shined a light on that for our teachers, for our staff, and for our school district. I think it's been an important reality for a lot of people. I think for a while we have been able to say, hey, you know what, outside of the school, and it has entered the school. And I think it's an important piece of training that we need to look at. Trauma-informed training really helps teachers to understand where our students are going, what our students are going through. I was lucky enough to work at a school that had the largest foster youth population in the state, and it was such an amazing learning experience to be able to work with kids that have truly gone through some intense trauma, and work with teachers that are trained to deal with that. I think as we shine a light on mental health and work with our counseling staff, and I love what we heard there, but work with our counseling staff, both at the school level and at the district level, I think we need to develop a comprehensive plan to make sure our teachers are equipped to deal with trauma in the classroom, and make sure that all of our staff are equipped.
Number 12.
Hi, thank you for having this here tonight. My name is Nancy Viano. I've been in the school district long enough to have had children go to Meridian High School on split shifts before Centennial High School got built. I now have one grandchild that has graduated from the district, and I have 3 grandchildren currently in the district in high school, 2 that will graduate this spring. I don't know any of you, you don't know me, but I have a granddaughter who's rather dismayed to hear that the principal at Centennial might not be there next year, so I think that's a real word of support for you. Anyway, I had a different question I was going to ask, but after listening to some of the questions tonight, I feel that I need to better understand, as some of you said, you have spent the last week better understanding critical race theory. I guess I would like an explanation of what you feel, how that differs and how that can be defined in teaching between that and history. I have watched some of the bills at the legislature. I feel that there is some undermining of education going on. I feel that it has been a very chaotic year for education across the country, really, with everything that we've had to do. And I think as we come back into what we'll refer to as near normal again next year, that there are going to be some real lights shown on several things that maybe didn't exist before. But when I hear things like maybe we don't want women's suffrage taught in school, that is concerning to me. And so if you could each just give me a little bit better understanding, which I readily admit I do not have, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. I hope that I don't just sound like I'm repeating myself, but I do think that when we're talking about teaching the history of our country, that the core curriculum has been designed and approved at the state level. Our job in the districts is to ensure that our students are prepared for the state assessments, and that we would be encouraging and monitoring and supporting our teachers to be teaching the state core. So when it comes down to what would be my feelings about that, I think that if you have concerns about the state core, then that is something that I would encourage you to be writing to your legislators, talking to your state school board, and encouraging them to look at things from a perspective and a lens that you have. I think we need to follow that core, and if we do, then we will be less likely to get ourselves into some trouble with others.
And I would add to that answer, in our core is our history, the good and the bad. And in our core is a belief that if we don't understand the great things and the negative things in our history, we're doomed to repeat them. And that is not political, it's things that have happened. And so what we've encouraged our teachers to do in the district where I'm currently serving is to stay away from, teach kids the difference between fact and opinion, and then teach from big driving questions so that students can use facts to form their own conclusions. We all know that hindsight is 20/20, right? When we look back through the lens of today to the past, it's easy to pass judgments in a lot of different ways. But when kids understand the context of what has happened in our, when decisions were made, the context of that, would they make different decisions? I think those are kind of questions that we can ask kids to help them be the thinkers and the deciders for themselves, because that is really what we want to teach. An example of that, just to make it concrete, we might ask a question, is there ever a time in our nation where the U.S. is justified in limiting human rights? That's a pretty big question for a senior in high school to answer. It would require a lot of research in a particular area to make a case one way or another. So rather than telling the student times where this happened, really the bigger, deeper process for the student is to have them answer those big questions with guidance of what's fact and opinion. Thanks.
I think the most important thing I'm going to say is that we have community involvement, and that what we teach in the classroom is a strong reflection of the values and the views of our community. We want to be able to reflect where we're at, and that's why we try to collaborate with our community. I think bringing them in and having intentional conversations about what we want that to look like is really important. We have standards to teach that the state prescribes. We will teach to those standards. I think looking at those standards is really important for teachers as we move through these issues. Digging into the standards is what our teachers do every single day. We really get into those standards, make sure that our lessons are aligned to those, and then having a strong enough leader both at the building level and at the superintendent level to be able to address issues as they come up, immediately address those issues, is really important as we work through this and make sure that what we're teaching in the classroom teaches kids to critically think, teaches kids to critically analyze, teaches them to synthesize information, but really stick to the facts of what our history is.
Well, I'll echo what a lot of our folks up here have said and what we said earlier, which is those Idaho content standards guide the work that we're doing in our classrooms. And so at this moment, the Idaho content standards for history do include women's suffrage movement, the civil rights movement. Those things are all approved by the legislature, and we are going to teach those in a factual way, and we're going to foster conversations in our classrooms around these issues. And there's absolutely going to be, and any of us who've spent any time in a high school classroom, we've all been around when some of those conversations go sideways, and where teachers have to use the art of teaching to really make sure that they are keeping that conversation in a fair, unbiased manner, and they're presenting both sides of the conversation. They're letting students think for themselves and explore the things that they already know and have those thoughts. Because ultimately what we want is students who walk out of our high schools at the end of their career who are good consumers of information. They can read and understand the information that's being presented in the world, and they can make their own decisions for themselves about what they believe. And so it is not our job to steer them or point them in a direction and say, this is how you should think. It's our job to teach them to think, but not to teach them how to think. The standards and the facts that go within our standards are part of that process. But at the end of the day, we want students who are good thinkers and can make those own decisions based on the information they're consuming. Thank you for the question.
Number 15.
Hi, Tyler Hurst, parent here in West Ada. I've met Brett before. So anyways, here's my question. Over the last year, as we've interdicted with so many problems that have taken place because of COVID-19 and other issues, it seems that in the West Ada School District that the union has had quite a bit of prowess in the decision-making process where parents maybe in some of the board meetings weren't represented. I think myself and other parents feel the exact same way. The parents were not represented as well as board members, or excuse me, as union members were. What would you do, knowing that only about 30% of West Ada's teachers are part of the union, what would you do to balance the difference and the differentiation of what parents and the community is asking for as opposed to the union, knowing that, once again, thinking back to those who even saw that there was a recall, or there was a, I'm so sorry, I'm caught off guard here, that there was even a walkout where the students suffered because the union members left and the parents were left without any voice. Thanks.
Well, the truth is, we need teachers as parents to educate our children, and our teachers need parents in order to be good partners in the work of educating children. So we need each other, and that was hard this year. That was really hard this year with all of the differing opinions that existed around COVID-19. I won't talk about what I will do, I'll talk about what I do. I use an approach to problem solving called interest-based problem solving, which means that everybody's at the table, all the interests are represented. We brought in, for example, parents, teachers, staff, students in the creation of our reopening plan, and when the board adopted it, and then we just worked it. So when there was conflict, and we actually had a pretty good rollout of our plan. At the end of, right when we were making the decision to return students to in-person 5 days a week or stay in hybrid in our secondary schools, we got into a lot of differing opinions. And so what we did is we went back to what we know works, because process matters to me. And it was bringing everybody at the table, and through this very specific process, we came up with a solution that actually ended up working for everybody. Everybody could live with the recommendation. To end the story, the recommendation was to make it a choice for families. And the interesting thing for us in this is we've also learned some things from our parents and students, that they like some of the choices that we offered them, and so they want to see some of those same choices continue in the future, which we never would have guessed had we not kind of followed up. Part of that process is to do that very same follow-up. So we're going to check in another week or two to see how things are going. But it's not a matter of choosing who gets to have a voice. Everybody should have a voice.
First, I think it's incredibly important to develop as a district what I call an educational architecture. Really, what are we about? What do we hold dear to us? And that makes these crises that we go through a little bit malleable, where we can lean back and say, this is what we believe in. That's not created just by the superintendent. That's created by a parent advisory panel that gets together and advises the superintendent. That's created by teachers, that's created by classified members, where we can all sit down at the table and we can discuss these issues before they become major issues. So we can, and that's something that we use to form our decision-making process as we go through these items. The unique part about this crisis is it has identified some areas that we really need to say, hey, how can we fix this? This needs to be fixed. Bringing parents to the table, regardless of viewpoints, would be an absolute goal of mine and just a priority as we move forward. The learning point from this is, obviously, we need to be able to collaborate with all stakeholders. How do we do that? I think we need to find that common ground. What do we have in common? And that's where that educational architecture comes in, where we say, hey, this is what we have in common. We want our kids to be educated. How do we get our kids in the most effective education opportunities possible. That would be that would be one of my very first priorities. And then the second thing is solutions oriented. Everybody's going to come at different things from different angles, but what are the solutions? How can we come up with? We know that there were problems. We know that there always are going to be problems. But let's look at some solutions. Let's look at different things. Let's look at different ways to solve the problem. Let's think outside the box a little bit. The great thing is we have unbelievable community members. We have unbelievable staff members. Bringing everybody together and really grasping the passion that we've seen for education this year, I think will not only bring us through this, but will also excel us far beyond.
Well, Mr. Hurst, and I have collaborated with you and some of the other parents I've seen tonight, but the question really is now, how do we, in a one-off situation because an email was sent that we have a conversation, but how do we build a system where all parents feel like they have a voice, and all parents, regardless of the stance they have on the issue, feel like they're represented and have a voice? And so other people have said it, but to me, one of the things I would like to do is build for each of our 4 regions, a parent advisory council, so that we have one for every region, so that we are actually getting enough voices out of each of those 4 regions, because there are some very diverse opinions coming from different parts of our district. And so building that. I also believe we have a real opportunity, and I've mentioned it before, is to build a comprehensive strategic plan for our district, a long-term comprehensive strategic plan. And that needs to be a community engagement effort where all members of our community are part of the process of identifying what do we believe in as a district, what are the things we value, what are our long-term goals, what are the things that we are going to say we hold on to and that we're going to guarantee for our students. That strategic plan isn't a district-driven strategic plan, it is a community-driven strategic plan, so it reflects the values, the priorities of the community at large. So we can't just wait for the problems to come to us, we have to get out into the community. So for me, once a quarter, meeting with those regional parent advisory groups would be the first step that I'd like to establish to start to hear the parent voice. And so that we are hearing the parents, the students, the teachers, we're hearing from all elements of our community.
If you read my bio, you'll know that I have served as a superintendent in the largest school district in Utah for the past 6 years. One thing that I've done during those 6 years is I have met with parent representative groups on a regular basis. I've called it, and it's existed before me as well, District Community Council. That District Community Council is made up of parents who are representatives selected by board members so that there is a connection back to the board, and have created that forum to listen to them, but also to present ideas to that group so that they can give feedback. And it's worked very well. When I talk about that representative group, it's impossible to meet with all parents. And so we have to use the technology. We have to give parents the opportunities to respond to surveys. Where possible, if we have virtual meetings, that is another way where parents can be involved and informed. I would hope that there isn't a feeling that one side or the other is getting more of the attention, and that we are balanced in our approach, that parents feel that they are being listened to, but also our staff and employees feel the very same way, that we care about all of our stakeholders and want to make sure that we are open and listening to them and responding to their needs.
Number 2.
Good evening. My name is Morgan Weigel. I'm a patron, and I have 2 kids who were formerly in the district. Question I have for you is, how do you plan to build public support for education after the year West Ada just experienced? And tonight we've heard a lot of generalities to specific questions. And if you could, at least from my perspective, if you've come this far in the interview process, you've probably thought about specific ideas that you have to accomplish this. And as a patron of the district, I'd like to hear those.
So I would start with, for a specific, I would start with superintendent symposiums. And those superintendent symposiums would be regional, and everybody would be invited to those. We would start out with something that I would like to get across to our patrons, but also something that I would like I'd like to get some feedback from our patrons on as well. What that does is that opens that door of communication and allows me to send the message of some of the great things that are going on in our classrooms, because I do think there's some really, really good things going on inside of our classrooms, and we need to get that message out. But that message can't be heard if I'm sitting in an office with my door closed. That message has to be a proactive message, and to be honest with you, people don't listen to that message when it's reactive. When things go bad and I come out and say, oh, let's meet, that doesn't go over very well. When things are going great and I say, hey, let's meet, people are more willing to listen. So those superintendent symposiums would be a priority for me to get out to each region. So our patrons from all the regions would be able to hear me. And really engage in powerful conversations so I can get a pulse of where our community is at. It's important that the superintendent has the pulse of the community, of the students, and of the staff in the school district, and maintains a consistent pulse. A school district this large, that's a challenge. You have to be intentional about it, and one of the ways I would do that would be through a superintendent symposium on a regular basis.
It is a great question because you're asking for some more specific, concrete elements. And so one of the things we've talked about, and I've talked about a lot lately, is we can't wait for the community to come to us. We can't wait for the community to reach out to us. We need to be more proactively assertive as being part of our community. And for West Ada, that community is broad, right? We have Eagle, we have Star, we have Meridian, we have parts of Boise, we have some elements of Nampa, we even some kids who even live in a CUNA zip code, Nampa zip code. So we have this wide, diverse community that we need to find a way to engage with. And we've talked a lot lately about why we need to utilize our team better. So our executive team, our building principals, how do we start to send those individuals out? And I need to be joining the Kiwanis clubs. I need to be going to Rotary clubs. I need to be going to city council meetings. I need to be going to all of these different places where the community is already engaging in their small community. And I need to start listening to the challenges that are going on within those individual communities. We can't wait for them to come to us. The second piece, and I mentioned it briefly, is this idea of a community-driven and built strategic plan. And so I will start with what I said at the very beginning, which is we start with building a portrait of a graduate. And we bring parents in and students in and teachers in and business leaders to talk about what do you as a community want a high school graduate to look like when they walk across the stage? What are the things you want to be able to say, I feel confident that when my student walks across the graduation stage in June, this is what they're going to be able to do, and this is the next step of their journey. That can't be built just by the administration. That has to be built with a community plan. And so that starts with that portrait of a graduate work. From there, our strategic plan process begins, because the portrait of a graduate is that end deliverable that we are going to do as a district. And if we can have that portrait of a graduate drive our strategic plan, all of our goal setting, all of our budget spending, then when we start to deliver on that promise to parents that their students are walking across the stage having met that portrait of a graduate bar, the trust comes back because they know that we're delivering on the promises that we built together.
Thank you again for asking a very good question. I think when I am trying to look at the post-COVID, what are we going to do to improve our community relations and so forth, I guess I would just give my response to very specifically we got to listen, so we have to provide ways to allow you to speak, to have a voice. I have already listed some of those specifically, but I also have been involved in the community and been willing to spend my time doing things like serve on the board for the United Way, work with our universities in my area, and give voice by willing to serve on the boards that work with their School of Education. I serve on with the Utah County Health Department where I live. That provides a voice from public ed in the community. I serve on a disaster resilience steering committee for Envision Utah. I would hope that those are ways that we are representing you, but doing it by being willing to go out into the organizations that exist out there, and including our legislature and lobbying for public ed.
Just to clarify, I think you really asked, like, how do we re-engage parents? And what we experienced this last year, I've used this term in the past, like, absence does not make the heart grow fonder. When you can't be in classrooms, when you can't really communicate well, have your students at school, talk to teachers in person, it's caused a lot of damage to relationships. But the good news is I have rebuilt trust in our community. And the couple ways we've done that, one is we have every Friday, there's a newsletter that goes out to every parent and community member, and also all of our staff, so they know what's being communicated, and it's consistent, and it's every week. So it's like, here's what's going on, here's what's coming up. That is particularly important when there's a lot of change or uncertainty like we had this last year. But that's just a one-way communication. It's me sending an email. What we know is even more important is that two-way communication. And this isn't really the best example of that either, because you're asking a question and we're all talking to you, but we're not able to follow up and actually talk to one another. So one of the things that we implemented in CUNA is it's called the study circle method. And because, I'm unable to talk to every single parent as much as I would want to, even in my district, it's a way for us to hear what people are thinking, because it takes a big group like this, even larger groups, and puts them into small groups where they're given several questions to ask, just to check, and we take notes. And we take that information and do something with it. An example of that is when we are working on our strategic plan right now, our focus of what we're going to be about in the district for the next 5 years. That was one way we could take something that seemed really large and make it smaller. So those are two concrete examples of, in the time that I have, that I could share with you.
Number 18. Mr. Heller will answer first.
Okay, this is kind of a follow-up to some of the questions that have been asked. Do you consider a 4-day school week to be back in school full-time? And that will just, I know it's COVID related right now, but your answers will definitely say a lot about where you're headed.
So I will start with a 4-day week is not what I would consider back in school full-time, and we're not able to feel like we can do the best possible things that we can do for our students when we're only in school 4 days a week. I do believe that our teachers have done some phenomenal work and gotten significantly better at how they deliver and what happens in remote learning, but I also know that there still continues to be variances in that across our system in terms of the opportunities that students get on a daily basis. So 4 days a week is not the ideal, and 4 days a week is not where we need to be next year. We need to be at 5 days a week. There are districts in our state who have been 4 days a week for an awful long time. That's what they do every year. But their days are longer, so they're getting their time in. For us, as a district, we need to be a 5 day a week school year, and next year that is the goal, is to be there for all of our students, K through 12, 5 days a week. I know for my own students, they need that structure of 5 days a week. I know for my own sanity, I need them to be in school 5 days a week. So to watch our students who are now back at the secondary level only 4 days a week, the relief that has given us to be there feels great, but we're not quite where we need to be. We know we need to take that one additional step. For our elementary folks who have been in school for most of the year, 5 days a week, we have seen the benefits that has happened. We have seen the fact that now the routines of being in school every day are in place. Our middle school and high school are still learning the routines of being back in school full time, and it's April. So yes, we need to be in school 5 days a week, and we all, I think, all of us up here tend to agree with that. But yeah, it's the goal for sure. Thank you.
Thanks for asking that question. My view is very similar. Full-time means back to school 5 days a week. What I've done in the district where I work currently, we have tried to be face-to-face as much as possible. We have tried to educate the medical community that there is a balance between the health issue and the social and emotional well-being of our kids, that students need to be in classrooms. School is a social event. Students need to be with their peers. They need to be taught by their teachers. And if at all possible, in that face-to-face environment. As we overcome some of these challenges that we had to go through early on with COVID, hopefully that is something that we can put behind us, move forward. I'll say this, one of the great experiences that I had was being the only football games in the nation that were being played, and it was because we were proponents of keeping our kids in their activities, and that included the other fall sports as well. I'm only using one as an example, but we were able to work with our health officials and help them see through data that it was important that we keep that balance that I just talked about.
I would agree, but I would give one exception. We have our alternative high school that's on a 4-day-a-week schedule, and what they're doing on that 5th day is internships within the community. That has been a challenge for us this year because a lot of places initially couldn't take on internships. But I think we have to be careful making absolutes, because and not that I disagree with you, I do agree that students should be, and you can see it from what we've done in CUNA, that students should be in school 5 days a week. That should be our kind of core. But then we also know from, and I'm assuming this is true here too, but I wouldn't know until I asked more questions and I knew more. But we've heard from parents and students alike that they want some choices in their schedules after this year. And so I think as long as we develop any schedule, first of all, when we know what's best for kids and we're using data to make those decisions, but that we're also working with moms and dads and our staff to develop those schedules. So it should be purposeful and intentional in any schedule changes, not like what we experienced this year, which was in an emergency.
Yeah, I would echo the comments of my colleagues, and I would say 5 days a week is full time. We need to get back to 5 days a week. I don't know how much more of an advocate I could be for our kids. I've been a strong advocate in getting our kids back to school. I will continue. I don't care what my position is. I will continue to be an advocate for our kids to get back to school. It is of the utmost importance to me. I have 2 kids of my own in the system, so trust me, I hear you. I understand where our parents are coming from. I have concerns over my own kids, and I work with them on their remote days. I think our teachers have done a tremendous job given the circumstances. I think they will continue to do a tremendous job. But what I've learned probably more than anything through this entire process is the value of in-person education and the value of a teacher in front of kids. I will absolutely advocate for that. For next year, as we head in, we will be back full time, 5 days a week.
Number 13. Mr. Jarman will take this first.
Hi, my name is Lindsay Heiner. I have 4 kids within West Ada School District, ranging from 8th grade to kindergarten. So West Ada, as parents, we believe has so much potential. It's an amazing place to live. I'm so impressed with the teachers, with the principals at my kids' schools. I mean, I'm blown away. And throughout this year, we have seen so much lack of collaboration in our perspective as patrons and as parents between the administration, between the board, between all parties. So my question for you would be, specifically, we are really searching for leadership, parents and patrons. We're really searching for that. So specifically, can you give us an experience from your past where you have shown leadership when it has been difficult? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to choose to not use the COVID year as that for this example. What I'll share with you is a time when we had a tragedy at one of the high schools, and what happened was a student chose to come to school and cause harm to their peers. And by that I mean they brought knives to school, and during their PE class pulled those out and started to stab students that were changing in the locker room. That was a very traumatic experience for our students that were in that class. First of all, it was a peer. They didn't understand why all of a sudden are they being attacked. It was a total surprise. And so with that being said, I think we did a pretty good job of working with the students after the fact, giving them the proper counseling and therapy if needed, and helping them out. But what we found through that experience was we did not do a good job with our adults. I believe we assumed that they were going to be able to handle it. And what we found from that is that we are all human beings, and when we have a traumatic event, there are times where we all need help. And so from that, we changed things in our district. We now have it set up with 2 different companies to allow the adults in the buildings to be able to have the additional help that they may need as well.
I appreciate that question. Being a leader in Idaho schools is very difficult. We are the last in per pupil funding in the United States. And so we carry additional burdens, I think, with that. So I think just by being a leader in Idaho schools, we're pretty darn brave for showing up. And so I want to thank all of the administrators who do that and the boards who do that for free. But an example, fairly recently, during the recession, we had to remove our all-day or our midday transportation for kindergarten, and it haunted me because I knew what that was going to mean. Inconsistency for kids, poor results, and that's exactly what happened. So working, and I'm not the leader that's going to say, okay, here's what we're doing, do what I say. Through working with others, taking feedback, looking at data, we determined to offer an all-day, everyday program in CUNA because we were not making gains. In fact, we could see immediately when we implemented that schedule and how it impacted student learning. And so I guess the leadership piece of this was looking at our budget differently. If our priority was to improve the start of our kids, it meant that we had to look at our funding differently. So we took the money, the governor has given us literacy funds the last few years, additional funds, and we put 100% of that behind all-day, everyday kindergarten. And since that time, of course, last year we didn't really have the results that we wanted to see, but we saw tremendous results, not only in literacy, but in numeracy, and which we did not predict that as a goal. And then through our feedback from our first grade teachers, they were able to get to first grade curriculum instead of really restarting a lot of the basic core kindergarten programs. So I think that's an example where I led with others to get to a result.
One of my previous duties was I got the lucky opportunity to oversee and lead a negotiations team. Anybody that's ever been part of a negotiations team, obviously when you're talking about money, there's every possible viewpoint. As we sat down at the table, we had parents involved in that, we had board members involved in that, we had district officials involved in that. We were at every different end of the spectrum, meaning we had people that said teachers deserve 0 raise, and all the way to teachers unions that said we want 20% raise. So we somehow had to come up with this, a solution to this. Bringing people together and starting out with what do we value, what common ground do we have, and how can we get everybody on the same table was a priority that I had with that group. As we tried to work through the money, and you know how money goes, it was always a contentious group. People really stood by. Setting norms ahead of time and setting clear expectations of what we needed to get accomplished through this committee was an important fact. It wasn't always the popular committee to be on. There wasn't people fighting with me to become the chair of the negotiations team. But I will tell you, at the end of the day, it felt good to be able to get people to come to a conclusion, to agree, and walk away with a negotiated contract that everybody was happy with, and there was compromise on both sides. And I think that's what is a sign of good leadership, is that everybody wins. When everybody walks out of a contentious meeting with a smile on their face, I think that it's a win for everybody, and that would probably be a leadership area that I would emphasize.
Well, as Ms. Johnson talked about, you can certainly, if you've been a leader, a building leader, a district leader at any point in your career, you start going through the mental Rolodex of all the challenges that you've faced. And I can certainly think through multiple times where we've had situations with credible threats that we've had to investigate, and how do we communicate safety to our families, or true incidents like Mr. Jarman talked about. I'll talk about one, and I was hesitant to even go down the COVID road at all, because we certainly have all lived through that year. I will tell you that the opportunity to try to lead a stakeholder group to come up with criteria to return our 6 through 12 students back to school, instead of being on a hybrid, to come to a daily schedule, bringing a fairly diverse group of people into a room was really, really challenging. Because we had people in the room who didn't want anything to do with us coming back to school on a full-time schedule. We discussed everything from 4-day weeks to 5-day weeks. So having to figure out a way to build consensus in a very diverse group is much like a negotiation process. And we walked out with compromises on both sides of the table. Nobody walked out feeling 100% satisfied probably with the final decision, but we felt like it was a good compromise that moved us closer to our goal. And so back to the questions we've had, 5 days a week is the goal. We got closer. We're to 4 days a week. And we had some really difficult conversations to get there. And we had some folks who, even though they were on the committee, came to the board meeting the next week, and they made sure to state that they didn't agree with the decisions that were being made. But at the end of the day, we all walked out of that room able to say, we're going to move forward with this plan. We have consensus as a group, and we're going to do what's best to take that next big step forward. It wasn't perfect, but it was the next big step we needed to take.
Number 17.
Good evening. I have a son who's about to start high school, and I've read all of your bios, and they're very impressive vis-a-vis the educational resume. I've heard mentioned that being the superintendent of West Ada is akin to being a CEO. With that in mind, has any of you had any professional experience in the private sector?
Actually, I have, and I would start with my father's own business, private sector. So ag business is my dad's background. He was a teacher actually before that and did this on the side. So I've put wheel lines together. I've changed sprinkler pipe. I've sold all of the irrigation equipment, all of those sorts of things from a young person. I've worked professionally. I would call that my dad's grunt labor, but I learned a lot through that experience. But on the professional side, I worked for a family nonprofit for several years that did support education, so it was in the education realm, and I was a part of a really disastrous implementation of a statewide effort, and it did not go very well at all. Even though the project itself, there were several projects that I worked on that went very well, but this project itself, because it did not go well, taught me a lot. And it was a statewide project, so as were the other several projects that I worked on in this family foundation. So, yeah, my experiences from, outside of education, I've done other things, done, corn topping, all of those sorts of things that make you realize, how hard people work, so.
So I have maybe a little bit of a unique background. I grew up in a family of educators. And I committed to myself that I would not become an educator. Clearly, I messed that up. And my purpose behind that was seeing my family. I thought to myself, you know what, I love that they were able to make a difference. I think I can make a difference in a different way. And so I was convicted that I was going to go join the FBI and go down law enforcement road. I was fortunate enough to land a job at a major insurance company where I did fraud investigations and learned a lot about the world, about work, and about the private sector. What I learned about myself, I would say, is that I have this innate need to make a difference in the lives of people. And that I really focused on. I wanted that to be before they were in trouble instead of after they had made a bad decision. And so my focus became, how do I do that? I went home and talked to my wife, and I think she was my fiance at that time, and I said, hey, I think I want to get an education. And she said, well, wait a second. You promised yourself, and you promised me that wasn't going to be your gig. And I went and met with somebody, and within weeks I was able to land a job as a math teacher. I feel extremely fortunate to have the experience I've had in the business world because I think it brings a different perspective to education. I know what the private sector is looking for. I'm an active reader of business books. I'm still very interested in the private sector because I think we're trying to produce kids that will be successful in that business sector. Thank you.
So my experience outside of the education world, before I knew exactly what I wanted to do when I grew up, I spent some years working first in the mortgage industry, and then I spent some time working as a real estate appraiser in Idaho. And I actually spent a lot of time driving lots of little back roads in Idaho and little rural towns in Idaho, going into people's homes, measuring and trying to assess the value of their home. And so I spent some time doing that, and certainly gave me a perspective on Idaho as a state and the diversity that happens within Idaho. It helped me to see, you know, you have to try to figure out a way to build a relationship with a person really quickly that you've never met as you walk into their home, and you want to look in every closet and you want to look in every space. And so it gave me the opportunity to stretch myself in some ways that I had never been asked to stretch myself as a high school student before, and even as an early college student. But I quickly did find that passion that in the back of my mind for education stayed there, and so decided to pursue that path, and certainly I'm glad that I did. But yeah, the couple years of doing real estate appraisal work was certainly an interesting time. I don't know that it's necessarily prepared me for being the superintendent of West Ada School District, but it was certainly an experience that I think has been valuable just in my own lifetime. Thanks.
I've worked since I was 11 years old, worked for people, but I have not been formally trained in anything but public education. I've done that for 35 years. I think that the CEO of a large organization, currently, I'm the superintendent and CEO of Alpine School District in Utah, which is the largest school district in the state of Utah. I think that the expertise that I bring is through the experiences that I have had as I've worked my way through the system, starting out as a teacher and a football coach, and then moving into administration. I stay active. I have been in formal education to maintain I'll call it the edge of what is going on out there, and have tried to make sure that I am as prepared to lead a district as possible. I think that title is something that just goes along with it. I think being called a CEO, that is nice, but really, am I able to lead the people and build the relationships and trust in order to have all the stakeholders feeling like that they can believe in what the district is doing, and working especially with our Board of Education as the elected officials to make sure that they are aware of and supportive of the things that we're doing, and then making sure that we follow through from our end to meet the needs of the board who sets the policies.
Number 5. Dr. Bob, you'll go first for this one.
My name is Bryce Ebling. I have 2 kids in West Ada School District, one at Meridian High School. She's a freshman. My son is a 5th grader at Pleasant View. Brett, you and I have had an opportunity to talk at length in the past, had nothing to do with this whatsoever. I came here wanting to talk about each of your opinions of critical race theory. I think it's been adjudicated to some extent, although I think in many minds, probably with very little specificity of what you as individuals understand it to be. So I'm going to take a little bit of a different course. I shared this with you, Brett. I come from California. I'm sorry. I'm probably more aligned with Idahoans at heart than most Idahoans. I spent 2 years, about 10 years ago, working with a superintendent of schools for Oceanside Unified School District. And the context here is really important to the question. Over those 2 years, we met quarterly for 2 hours. That's a lot of time from a superintendent to give a single parent. My concerns at the time are very similar in nature. They rhyme a lot with 1619 Project, critical race theory. At the time, it was Common Core. And my biggest concern about Common Core was how it was being rolled out. And the exceptions to the rule. You guys have all given great I'm going to call it political speak, of how great of a, big grandiose plan can be. The problem is in implementation, and you've talked about it a little bit, I think, Wendy, if I've heard you correctly. With Common Core at the time, the challenge was I was seeing a lot of instances around the nation, and they got very close to our school district at home. Oceanside, San Bernardino, it was about about an hour and a half away. And the problem with it was, if anyone here is familiar with Brooklyn, there was a teacher in Brooklyn on his own accord, at least I'll presume it is, and let's pretend that it was for the moment, that Brooklyn teacher asked an entire class to defend the Nazis and their treatment of Jews during the Holocaust and their targeting of Jews. Now, my personal opinion is, if you have one day where it's that and the other day it's the opposite, you're not going to be hearing from me as a parent. But that wasn't the case. And the superintendent, unfortunately, just couldn't see how educating teachers, which is what I was asked, I wanted to educate teachers on concerns that I was having, things that I was seeing, because with, close to 20,000 teachers in West Ada? Having 20,000 eyes on something is a heck of a lot better than having 5, 20. I want to know what you would do very specifically. There's 2 questions to this. It's 2 parts, and I'm sorry this was long. The first is, I'm big on accountability. Sorry, that's the second part. The first part is, what would you do if you were presented with this, a situation like this? Assume what I've given you is factual. How do you create, and the second part is, how do you create an accountability up front? Because you guys have all talked about these great plans of how knowing how to get where you're going. How in the world do you create something up front to say, these are the problems that we're seeing. If this happens in our school district, this is the remediation for it. That's what I was asking for. I want to know from each one of you how you create that very, very specifically. Please, no political speak.
Well, I will start with what would you do? And I think that a district this large, it's really important to educate everybody on these types of issues. And what that means is, that means getting our directors involved, that means getting our assistant superintendent involved, that means getting our building leaders involved, because you're right, you can't be in every single teacher's classrooms. How we react to that is probably the next piece. And I go back to other things that we've brought up tonight. It's about planning, and you kind of talked about that, but there needs to be planning for that. We can't just close our eyes and hope that these things don't come across our classrooms. I think we need to have a clear plan about what we do with these things. I think we need to have clear expectations. I have found, as I have led teachers, as I've been able to be in the trenches with teachers and work with teachers, teachers want to meet or exceed expectations. What oftentimes happens is we don't give them clear direction, and that lack of clarity becomes problematic. And that's when we start walking a little bit to the right or a little bit to the left, and we don't give them clear expectations. I think it's a priority that our building principals and our building leadership, that our executive team, that our directors, that our assistant superintendent are all on the same page on what those expectations are, and that there's a system of accountability for everybody to make sure that what we're teaching in the classroom is in line with what we believe in as a district should be taught.
So I'm going to talk just maybe a little bit as a time as a building leader, as a building principal, when something very similar to what you kind of described happened. And I started hearing from a handful of students that in a government class, in discussing current events, it started to become very clear that one side of the political belief system was being given a greater amount of airtime in the classroom, was being encouraged more than maybe the other side of the conversation. That the teachers' political beliefs were starting to bleed into kind of directing the way the class conversations were going. The bottom line is the conversation with that teacher has to be very direct in terms of their role in that classroom, and that their role in that classroom is not to drive conversations towards their beliefs. I always approach things as a teacher and as an educator that the kids should have no idea what my personal political beliefs are, because those have nothing to do with what I'm teaching them in the classroom. So that has to be the expectation, and that goes back to us working with the school board to make sure that our policies are written in a way that allow for the enforcement of those ideas, that those are reflecting, that the expectation is, as Mr. Jarman talked about, that the expectations are that we are teaching the standards, and when teachers are teaching outside of that, we have to have hard conversations about that. Now, I think we also have to understand, it's a human business, and teachers, whether our students see them that way or not, they're humans, and they make mistakes. So we have to give teachers opportunities to learn from their mistakes. But it goes back to professional development, it goes back to having clear policies, it goes back to early in the year. We have policies we have our teachers review every year as part of our school district. Here are the policies you need to be aware of, and every year they have to review those and sign off that they understand those. This may need to become part of that we are saying, are you understanding that you have to present both sides of the issue, and you cannot allow your personal biases to paint the course of what's going on in the classroom.
I agree with Brett, and I also would add that I have no problem in helping our teachers to understand what the expectation is, that for a communication to go out that we do expect our teachers to follow the state core, and then that we have a method whereby we work with someone who has chosen to not follow that. It's very similar to what we do with students who have issues with rules and policies. When they break them, what do? Typically, you don't say it's a triggering event, you've lost your job. But what we do is we indicate if something has been verified that needs to stop immediately, and then you do your earnest and persistent effort from there. If a teacher eventually ends up being insubordinate, then yeah, they could lose employment. But most of the time, as Brett said, when a mistake is made, typically they want to fix it and get on with life and move forward.
Yeah, I wouldn't add too much more to that other than to say that most times where there's a complaint that's made, when we've researched it, there's a misunderstanding somewhere. An example of this just happened to me on Friday. A parent got a hold of me and said that we were teaching critical race theory in one of our classes at the high school. I got a hold of the principal. I said, here's what was reported. He researched it, and what had happened is somebody brought it up. It was a current event, right? It just happened in the legislature. They held back educational funding because of this. And so kids were talking about it. The teacher was not giving her opinion one way or another. They were just talking about, like, what is it? You know, those sorts of things. But I really don't have much more to add to what my colleagues have said here. Is when there is when a teacher isn't doing what he or she needs to be doing, then our first visit, and it's not mine, it's the person who supervises that teacher, is to correct and to coach. We don't want people living in fear, or else they won't be working for us. That's just point blank the way it is. If it continues and it's a pattern of evidence that this person is being insubordinate, then that escalates through our process of evaluation, you know, and may or may not lead to removal.
Number 7.
Hi, I'm Alexis Morgan. I have 4 kids in the district, and I'm also actually a substitute teacher for the district. This question is kind of close to my heart, actually. Our school board is admittedly learning on the job, and they're volunteers. No one's trained prior really to coming to this position. Only one current member of the West Ada School Board has run in an election, And this is in part due to the dissatisfaction of patrons with school board members. How would you, as the superintendent, help the current school board members learn their role and stay within their scope of responsibilities?
Thank you, Alexis. And as a former school board member yourself, you know the challenges that come with that. And I think that we have to build the bridge between district administration and our school board and really get to the point where we are working as a functioning organization and we are working together for the goals of our district. We started to leverage the Idaho School Boards Association to start conducting more trainings for us. I think that is a plan that we have to continue to do in the future. Because as you mentioned, as board members come in, there's this constant need to make sure that that board member is trained up and they're part of the process and they understand the protocols that are in place. So I do believe post-COVID that hopefully we're moving past, that this summer, for me as a superintendent, my first few days on the job, my first few weeks and months on the job are going to need to be spending a lot of time with each of those board members individually. But then as a group, we need to be having our summer retreat where we're getting together, we're coming up with our new board protocols, we're making sure that we are all on the same page in terms of what's my job and what is their job, and that we're making sure that we have a clear line of what that looks like. But then it goes beyond that. We have to continue to foster that relationship so that we do have an open door policy where they know they can come to me. They know that I'm going to tell them the honest truth about the good, the bad, and the ugly that's going on out in the district. And that I know that I can trust them, that they're going to support district administration as we try to make recommendations that we believe as educational professionals are in the best interest of our school district. So it has to be a collaborative relationship. I believe that that's what our board wants it to be. I think this process, the last, feels like a really long process, but has been really good for us to engage with the board at a different level. And for me personally, to learn about where the board wants to go is another next step. As we finish up final interviews, some of my questions that I have for the board tomorrow will be very much about that. How do we get ourselves to a place where we're working together for the best interest of the parents, the staff, and the students of West Ada?
I appreciate that you're a substitute teacher. That is one of those areas of scarcity. And so thank you for doing that, and plus your other history that I didn't know about, but thanks to Brett, now I do. I believe in what you've already heard. I think that it's important that the Board of Education receive training from their association, from ISBA. I know that Misty Swanson has spent a lot of time helping me to understand and to be prepared for this experience, and I believe in her ability to help to train and to coach different board members with the appropriate duties that they need to take on in their role that they play as the elected officials that help to set policy and hire the superintendent. Saying that, hiring a superintendent is a very important job, and I believe that board members have that opportunity to, if they pick the right leader, that they are then asking that person as the superintendent to help lead and direct the day-to-day operations of the district. That's why we are hired. And so I agree with what Brett said, though. We do need to have that good relationship and work together with our board. And I would say that going to NSBA is also an advantage where they can learn and improve their skill set.
Thanks for subbing. That I know that has been such a challenge for every school district in the United States. So I wouldn't add too much more to that other than to say definitely understanding everybody in this room that being on the board of trustees is truly a labor of love. These people don't get paid. They volunteer because they care about kids and they care about their community. It's service to the community. And boards across the United States have really taken a beating, this year. So I think first and foremost, we need to understand that. And yet it's one of the most important jobs and probably one of the most localized examples of our democracy in action. And ISBA, the Idaho School Boards Association, it puts on amazing professional development for boards. There's a conference every year where board members have the ability to not only learn, but also network with other boards and learn from one another. I think the National School Boards Association is a great idea too. I think that would be great to go to something like that because then you have an even better opportunity to network with other states that have large districts like West Ada. But then I would also add to this, having board members work co-leading committees, such as a policy committee, a legislative committee, that helps them to learn themselves, and they aren't responsible 100% for all the meat and potatoes of the agendas and all of those sort of things. So they're learning with an administrator. It would be my vision, with some of our staff on, what is our legislative policy? How do we assess that? And what policies do we need to review, and why? And each of them would become experts in different areas within the district.
Thanks so much for the question. I think the answer to this question really starts with the board picking a superintendent and making sure that that's an opportunity to have clearly defined roles of what everybody's responsibility is. And then moving forward, I think keeping the board in the loop with good, strong study sessions so they know exactly what's going on in our schools. They know what's going on within our departments at the district office. So they have a good pulse of everything that's going on. And then as we move forward, I think clear, transparent conversations with our board where we are going to show the good, bad, and the ugly, I think, has been said before, where we're really going to talk about the things, because we don't necessarily learn from our successes. We learn a lot from our failures, and being able to look at those failures and say, okay, well, what went wrong here? What are we missing? How do we learn from this, and how do we get better? I think are really critical conversations that we can start having. But clearly defining the roles of the board, the roles of the superintendent, is an important part of the process, and putting systematic protocols in place for communication to board members, I think, is a really, really important piece that we can put in place moving forward.
So that concludes our forum for this evening. I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank the candidates. And I will remind you that QR codes are posted around the room and located at the back table. That's your chance to give comment on the candidates, and the board will have access to those comments. Thank you.